Hello and welcome to the Navy Blue Corner. I'm Ian, joined as always by my good mate Lockie, and we are here to recap all of Carlton's moves in the 2024 AFL trade period. But first, Lockie, I have to ask, mate, how are you going?
Brilliant, mate. Brilliant episode. I'm already calling it coming up because we've got so much to discuss, and you and I haven't caught up for a couple of weeks to talk Blues, so I'm keen.
Yeah, it was one of those windows where a lot happened, but also a lot didn't happen as far as maybe incomings and outgoings. But there's plenty to talk about. And look, our season did end prematurely, being eliminated, in the first week of finals. And I think there's been a lot of differing opinions on how do we improve the list? How do we improve this team heading into 2025? So, yes, I'm very keen to hear all your thoughts and all the business and everyone else that's listening and watching this, your thoughts throughout. Were you happy? Were you impressed? Were you disappointed with the moves? But let's jump straight in, Lockie. Let's have a look at what actually transpired. So coming into the football club was pick 3, pick 38, pick 63 and 68. Brisbane's second round pick for next year, Nick Haynes, and out was pick 12, 34, 66, our future first, our future second, Matt Owies and Matt Kennedy. So when taking a look at all of that, we really brought in one established player in Nick Haynes instead of maybe targeting more of those ready-made players. We've decided instead to attack the draft. Now, with that, we also moved on to establish players in Kennedy and Owies. So what are your overall thoughts on the ins and outs, Lockie? Are you happy with all of our moves?
Yeah, I think how you sit about all of this really depends on how you feel about, I guess, the current list and where you think we are in the journey. I think for me, if I try and gauge the general commentary, I think I'm probably more bullish on the current list or the list prior to this period than most in terms of how soon we can win a flag. I felt like 12 months ago, we had a very good chance to win a flag. And if things went differently this year, we could have as well. So if I look at it from that lens, we didn't lose anyone to me that I think is crucial to us winning that flag. And we're now going to be able to bring in somebody who, hopefully is someone that is going to be able to impact this first season and be a star of our club for the next 10 years. So that's a winning period to me.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a win is how I'm probably perceiving it. Our depth definitely took a little bit of a hit, losing guys like Kennedy, Owies, and even, delisting a Jack Carroll. There's certain positions on the ground that you're starting to look at the depth chart and thinking, are there maybe too many gaps if we can't stay healthy? Something we've struggled to do almost forever. But if you're looking at the positives and what we probably needed to do, we needed to bring in sort of high talent. And maybe that was Dan Houston, but maybe I'm too much of an optimist, and the excitement around a potential pick 3 that could be a future star for 10 years rather than maybe 2 or 3. That's probably what excites me the most in a position of the ground in the midfield that we need more than half back. And when I'm kind of going through the ins and outs that I sort of started to talk about, you can kind of cancel a lot out here. I mean, the future second that we gave away and got back, that disappears. So that's nothing. We moved, 2 spots back from 66 to 68. Get rid of that. Basically, the same with the 34 to 38. That's only 4 spots. So really, in totality, we turned pick 12 and a future first, Owies and Kennedy, into pick 3 and 63. The only potential bad business, I think, is trading out that future first pick. However, next season is when you can start to trade multiple first round picks into the future. So theoretically, you could always just continually trade that pick back in using that extra first round pick. Plus in 2026, we've got Cody Walker as a father-son. Now, I know the bidding will change, and so it may be a bit harder. Maybe we will need a first-round pick in that year's draft. However, if we are able to match it in other ways, then we've potentially just gotten rid of a pick, say the 2026 pick, because you'll trade that back into the draft next year, a pick that we might not be able to use because of the father-son, into pick 3 this year, which I think is a massive, massive win in a very much talked about kind of super draft. The one question I kind of have, though, is have we done enough, Lockie? Did we bring enough of that ready-made talent in to improve? I look at a few of the teams around us in the top 8, the teams outside the top 8 that have improved. Freo has brought in a guy like Bolton. Adelaide have brought in, Cumming, Peatling, Neil Bullen. Collingwood have got Perryman and Houston. Gold Coast, to a lesser extent, they've got Rioli, Noble, another academy kid in the draft. They've definitely improved. Teams that are vying for a flag finished in the top 8, Geelong and Hawthorn. They'll both improve, bringing in Bailey Smith and then Barras and Battle. Sydney and Brisbane have pretty much stayed similar, but at least they made that grand final. There are maybe a few teams that have dropped off. Dogs and GWS have definitely lost a few. Dogs lost Smith, McRae, Daniel, only really brought in Kennedy. GWS have lost Peatling, Cumming, Perryman, and, the man that we stole from him, Nick Haynes. Where do you see our business playing into that for next year? Did we do enough?
Yeah, I guess that's when, if you want to be the optimistic Blues supporter, I would look to continuity as being something that we are going to be able to bring into this season that a lot of those clubs that you're talking about aren't. And if you believe in the fact that we hopefully have our best luck with injury next year that we've had, whether you're a believer in the new program and all that kind of thing, or whether just things fall our way, I think even though I agree with you that a lot of those teams made moves that did make them better for next season, I still see us as being one of those top 4 teams, to be honest.
Yeah, there's definitely some positions I would have loved us to strengthen and continue to be able to bring in, a Bailey Smith straight into that midfield, or a Barras or a Battle into our key defensive stocks that we definitely need to improve upon. But were we likely to get any of those players? We would have had to have given something to do so. So in the end, pick 3 is a decent consolation prize, to say negatively on that. But in the end, like you say, we think we have the top end of this list to win a flag last season, particularly the season that's going to happen next year in 2025. It's about staying healthy. And maybe that is still an issue. And can we truly trust and plan for being healthy? Maybe we do need to improve the depth and ensure that if someone in our midfield isn't ready to go, if these hamstring issues to Chera persist, that we've got cover, that maybe that's what we need to win a flag. But I kind of like that we're removing this safety net and saying, no, let's go all in with the talent we have and improve on with that, the younger player. So I want to go through that pick 3 and talk about it, because it's probably the hottest topic of conversation. Obviously, we've got the, draft preview to come where we'll talk a little bit more about this, a little bit more depth. But basically, the trades that happened to allow us to acquire pick 3. Initially, we traded with Brisbane. We gave away our future. No, we gave pick 34 and 66, got a future second and pick 73, which basically then allowed us to get that pick 14 for the future first and a future second. If we were trading a future first, we needed to have a future second. So that's basically why that convoluted deal ended up taking place. And then with, the 3-way trade, West Coast and Richmond, we ended up bringing in pick 3, pick 63, pick 68 for what was 12, 14, 73, and Matt Owies. What do you make of that aggressive move to trade up to pick 3 from 12 and 14?
The way that I've been thinking about it is, and I guess when you think about a top 3 selection and you think about some of the top 3 picks that we've taken through kind of our rebuilding years and that kind of thing, I don't think there's ever been, correct me if I'm wrong, a time in our lifetime where we're picking at this section of the draft into a team that is actually competing. So it's such a different situation for me that we get to bring in somebody in the top 3 in a time where we can nurture them and protect them with the other guys. So I love it. Like, it just makes me so excited. Like, I know we can talk about the picks that we had, like the 12 and 14 and that kind of thing, and where you value them. But for me, being able to go right to the top is just so exciting.
No, I agree. And it is an interesting thing to look at, bringing in that high-end talent when your squad is good to go. You're not relying on this guy having to come in and be the flag bearer for your football club. And it's such a funny thing when you look back at drafts, and always there's, oh, why did this team pick this player here? They ended up playing 10 games of footy and weren't any good. But every single year, primarily, particularly that sort of top 10, everyone has the same top 10 players. It's just the order everyone has them in. So clearly everyone rates these players to a degree quite high. The reason they probably don't kick on is the club that they went to at that time and what that did for their development. You look at just us and the Paddy Dow, Lockie O'Brien. We brought these guys in when we weren't any good. They had to play midfield time immediately with no protection. Compare that to what Ashcroft and Dacos have been able to do at Brisbane and Collingwood in experienced, really solid teams. All of a sudden, they're flourishing. And that's what I'm excited about to see with our potential pick 3 selection is they don't necessarily need to play round 1. We want them to, obviously, we want them to make that impact, but we can allow them to slowly develop. They don't have to get rushed in. And that's probably where we're going to see the best out of these players. For me, I think it's a very smart move. And probably the one thing around the pick 3 or 12 and 14 is, should we have gone the 2 picks, considering this is a so-called super draft? It's a little bit more depthy than other years. What are your thoughts on that? Would you have rathered 2 picks in the teens, 2 chances at a really good draft? Or do you prefer that higher end, maybe higher ceiling player at pick 3?
I think there's a really good discussion that you could have with this, and I wouldn't blame anybody for wanting the 12 and 14. I had a bit of a look back because just the discussion that you were just having then. So I went back to 2009, and don't shoot me if I've missed someone here. But so since 2009, it looks like there's been 5 teams that made finals the previous year and then took a top 3 pick. So that was Ashcroft, Sam Darcy, Jamara, and Mills. They were all father-son or academy guys.
Yeah.
And then Taranto has been the only player that was actually not, like, was just taken as a regular pick. So I think of those 5 guys, if we get an average of those guys output out of pick 3, I would much rather bank on that than take the risk of what we'd get at 12 and 14, even if it is deeper.
No, that's massive. That is a great little sort of clip that we can chuck out on the socials there. As far as just how much this pick 3 is going to be an absolute superstar immediately. And I think the one thing that I'd love to clarify on this around this so-called super draft, because look, I never claimed to be an expert on the draft. I just happen to watch a lot of under 18 footy. So I feel like I have a little bit of a grasp on it, maybe compared to the average punter that just tends to read Cal Toomey's form guide, and that's all they can kind of go off, because it's the media and everyone saying super draft. But I think there's some misunderstandings with this, because it's a super draft in the sense that the top end of the draft, you know, that top 5, it's hard to split them. There's no real standout number 1. And you could argue that means that the absolute peak of it maybe isn't as amazing, but you've still got some really solid players there in that top 5. It's then also that probably picks 15 to 30 that there's a lot of quality in the depth. A lot of those guys should get drafted, where in other years, after kind of the top 15, it's anyone's guess at who you're potentially bringing in. They probably will never play any football. You're looking at this and saying you can throw a net over them, and any single player is kind of even at this stage. And while there is that depth, I think, in this year's draft class, there's still a difference between a pick in the teens and a pick in that top 5. You're always going to get closer to a superstar in those top 5 picks than you are in the teens, particularly with your father-son bidding and what else can happen in other drafts as well. There's also a difference in the position of the players that you're going to get. If you're looking at that top 5, it is elite midfielders. That is what the top 5 is. The picks in the teens, it's small forward, key position talent that you're able to bring in. Those that are midfielders are maybe they're a little bit slow. Maybe they're not super tall, so they play a little bit more in the forward line than they are a pure midfielder. So while getting a couple of picks in the teens is great for adding to the depth. Maybe we'd be able to bring in another small forward, a halfback, a key defender. Great for the depth. But if we want to hit now and get the best available player, that top 3 pick, bringing in an absolute elite young midfielder, that's the pick for me. So
love it.
If you have the opportunity to bring in probably the position we need the most, a point of difference midfielder over a couple of depth players, I know which one I'm taking every single week.
Yeah, no, you absolutely nailed how I feel about this too. So very exciting.
And I heard a bit of a stat as well. Can't remember where I heard this, so apologies. But apparently, picks inside the top 10. I mean, it seems this is such a stupid thing to say, but the stats are that you are way more likely to generate a 200-plus game player than outside the top 10. That's the bracket of players. It's not first round, it's top 10 is where the cutoff is for that. So I think that's very smart. So let's do a little bit of a draft preview to a degree, Lockie. What type of player do you think we need to take at pick 3? What are the traits that we're kind of lacking right now? If you was to build the perfect footballer at pick 3, what would you be wanting?
I guess for me, when you think about the midfielders, I guess it's that I would think like a very attacking mindset is, I guess, what I kind of think about when I think about what we loved with George Hewitt and Cripps and Chera and those guys. Like, we understand that there's strong defensive traits there and a largely quite similar kind of player. So it really is just kind of filling the gaps of what you would put as a perfect midfield is what you want from this guy, right? And from the sounds of it, it's kind of what you get from the majority of these guys in that top 4 or 5.
Yeah, I think the things you're definitely looking for are that speed. Obviously, ball use is something where after in the midfield, a bit of that explosive burst and someone who can maybe kick some goals as well. We probably don't have that midfielder that is that front half player as well. And basically, I'll run through a little bit of some of the players that could be available at that pick 3. The first one, who's my kind of number 1 choice, who I don't think will be there, I think he's going to go number 1 to Richmond, is Sam Lawler. He's 187 centimeters. He's explosive, he's strong, he's physical, and he can kick goals. He's more of that front half player. He's been likened to Dusty Martin. I hate player comparisons, and I steer clear of doing that every single time. But he is that more physical midfielder that likes to push, likes to fend off and go forward and kick goals. He's strong overhead because of his height as well. And why I like him sort of almost over everyone else in this draft class is just match-winning ability. And when you're looking for who can have the biggest impact for you, it's someone who can win the football and kick goals. And I think he's the number 1 at that right now, and someone that could play round 1 straight away. Physically is ready to go. The fact that he can play in that half forward role as well means he's more likely to play. But I do unfortunately think that he will be gone by our pick. The next one that is really highly rated by everyone, the most linked to Carlton, is, of course, Finn O'Sullivan. Now, he's incredibly agile. He's got a massive, massive leap on him. He is explosive. He's got that really quick first couple of steps when he wins the football to clear that contest. He can have a bit of a scoreboard impact as well. He has kicked goals in his time. I'd say a lot more of that has been when playing forward rather than midfielder. He's not necessarily that midfielder that kicks goals. He's a midfielder that can play forward, and when he goes forward, he can kick goals, if that makes sense. I do have a couple of issues with Finn maybe over the others, and that's just that he doesn't accumulate a lot of the football. He doesn't have those high disposal games. Now, midfield doesn't really need that. We've got Walsh, we've got Cripps, Chera. Those guys can play that role. But my worry is if he hasn't shown that now, what does that exactly translate to at the AFL level? And look, he was probably the number one rated player going into this year's draft. He's just had some injury issues. He had fractured hand, thumbs. He had all these weird hand issues and just couldn't get on the park and play consistent football. So his form this year wasn't amazing. He showed glimpses of it, but just wasn't able to put together, a great consistent year. And I'd say he has a higher ceiling than probably everyone else based off his sort of 2 years worth of work. But, and this is maybe offensive to him, I feel like he has the biggest potential to be a bust because of his year this year and not seeing enough of it. But again, that ceiling is really high. Probably the guy I have rated higher than him at this stage is Sid Draper from South Australia, 182 centimeters. He's just speed is the word when talking about this guy. Explosive runner away from stoppages, direct as well, gets the ball and just straight to goals. That's the kind of player he is. And I would describe him as everything our midfield doesn't have is everything that this guy brings. And he really caught my eye last year as a bottom major for South Australia. He was already by far their best player last year. So this year I was interested to see how he'd go. And I thought he only improved. His disposal by foot was something that has really, really increased in 2024. And physically, like a Sam Lawler, he's ready to go if we need him to play round one. The fact he was so good in his bottom age year, I think, shows that. And he played a fair few games in the Sandful and was consistent, averaging over 20 disposals in all those games. So his output didn't sort of drop away when playing against men, which is something that excites me. Yes, he maybe doesn't have that leap or that height like the other two I've mentioned to go forward and kick goals. He's not necessarily that front half player, but he's the speed and burst in the midfield. And I think when you're looking at what our team needs right now, someone that is ready to go, has those pacey attributes, that's what I look at with this guy. And that's why I have Draper as my clear number 2 option if Lawler is gone. And then probably the last guy is Jagger Smith, who halfway through this year was the number 1 pick, nailed on. I think as we've moved closer towards the draft, it's not that he's not good at football. He clearly is. He's probably the most well-rounded midfielder apart from Ashcroft. He's that accumulator type, but he doesn't have all those little points of difference that the others do, which is why maybe a team like Richmond that have a few picks are a bit more excited to take a punt on those goal kickers or guys that have something different. Like Jagger Smith, he's probably the cleanest by hand. He's the most creative and best extractor that there is out of this draft. But it feels like he's a blend of Hewitt, Chera, Walsh, rather than adding something that Carlton currently don't have. And I think Richmond, if North basically keep pick 2, I think North take Jagger Smith here, which means probably O'Sullivan is available for us to select or Draper. But if Richmond trade up, that's potentially where it gets tricky, because I'd say right now they're more likely to take Finn O'Sullivan than Jagger Smith. So it maybe puts Carlton in a tricky predicament of, do you go the guy who potentially is that more well-rounded, less risky option, better player at the moment in Jagger Smith? Or do you take the guy that is more targeted towards your needs? And I really like Draper, and I probably have him rated above Jagger Smith anyway. But that would be the interesting scenario to see what Carlton do if O'Sullivan and Lawler are gone. Do they go safe and pick Jagger Smith because he is that safe option? He's more expected to be a Chera and Walsh you can depend on, or do you go that speed burst of a guy like Draper? That's my little rundown on the potential picks.
I love it.
For that pick 3. But I'm very interested to know what everyone's thoughts are in the comments on YouTube on what player you want us to draft at pick 3. Where are you landing on the type of player that I sort of went through with those few potential draftees?
I mean, I have to love everything that you're saying there and back your view. It definitely, you're far more connected than me, but I'm taking a lot more interest this year into understanding how it could play out. I think it's so much more exciting, to me at least, when we're able to we know that one of these 4 guys is going to be there for us, right? Like, it's very different to in previous years where you have to speculate so much about how the draft will play out and know who will be there in the teens or 20s, for example. So, yeah, it doesn't sound to me like there's a bad outcome really there.
Yes.
Just that,
Agreed.
But everything that you talk about with Sid definitely resonates.
Yeah, 100%. Now, before we move on from pick 3, there has been word that a few teams do want to trade up into this sort of pick 3, pick 2 position. The question is, would you entertain this? I know we've already traded up with a few picks, but I think West Coast were really dumb to talk not Carlton at the moment. I think West Coast could have shopped this around and gotten a better deal than 12 and 14. When you look at some of the clubs that do want to move up, St Kilda have got picks 7 and 8. Richmond got a combination 6, 10, 11. Melbourne have got picks 5 and 9. Now, potentially, obviously, something might have to go back to those clubs for just the pick 2 or 3. But feels like West Coast could have got a better deal. We may potentially get a better deal thrown at us. Would you entertain any of those scenarios where you get 2 picks, but they're maybe a little bit closer rather than that 12 and 14?
Well, this was the note that I made when I saw this you put this in the run sheet, that based off the precedent of that West Coast trade, any of these that you would detail feel insane and unlikely that they would happen, right? It would seem like absolute thievery. And I would feel pretty confident that Nick Austin wouldn't have done that pick 3 deal with this in mind, like a little flip job. But having said that, I don't know if you want to go into each of these teams, but some of them result in us still having a very high pick.
I think that would be the thing that would be the closest thing to tempt me. I wouldn't take it. I think you always take the best talent available when we're not a squad right now that needs a lot. We still need a few pieces, but I'd rather that absolute elite top 3 pick rather than closer to that pick 10 as soon as you start to get some bids, pushing those out as well. Now, if you're able to get, a Melbourne pick 5 or Richmond pick 6, at least as the one, that then you're starting to go, okay, you could entertain this. Depends what the other part of that deal is. And again, is Nick Austin's real masterstroke? Is he, absolutely 10 years ahead with his planning where he knows that he can get this deal from West Coast just to trade it out? I highly doubt it. And when you are a team that's looking to trade up, rarely, if ever, have they then traded back. So clearly we have these scenarios in our head of Richmond may get up into this position, but there's still a player we clearly want, a bracket of player we want. And if I'm looking at my draft rankings at who would be available then past that point, I don't love it. Yet maybe if you get maybe Melbourne's pick, you could get a Harvey Langford, who is more of that really good kick on his left, a little bit of a bigger body, can kind of push forward a little bit because of his size, but he's slow. He's not necessarily fast. So are we really bringing in something that isn't what we already have? Probably not. I just don't think it's worth it. I'd much rather have 12 and 14, bring in, which may be stupid, but bring in a small forward like a Joe Berry, bring in a Toby Travalia as a running halfback or another key defensive option and help the depth rather than be stuck in the middle of the elite midfielder. Now you're kind of reaching for those other needs. So I'm not going to entertain that at all at this stage. I think you go for the best available talent, because when are you ever going to have this chance again, Lockie, while you're a top 8 team?
I know. Yeah, I'm in total agreement.
So let's look at a player that we lost and kind of look at the deal, see if you like it, Lockie, because we lost Matty Owies. It was another 3-way deal. This was obviously the one that got us that pick 3. Pick 3, 63 and 68. We lost 12, 14, 73 and Owies. That was the trade. A lot seemed perplexed in Carlton and their thinking around why were they happy to let go of a guy that's kicked 30 plus goals every bloody year for the last few years, considering our lack of goal kickers outside Harry and Charlie. So what are your thoughts on moving on from Matty Owies and where that leaves our small forwards for 2025 and beyond?
Yeah. very, very interesting. I mean, when you throw out the thing that so many people are throwing out is that 30 goals stat. And I mean, just before we came on, you and I were having a little chat about some of the other deals and the fact that Stringer put through 42 this year, and then he got traded for a pick in the 50s. You know, he's a few years older than Owies, of course, but still, I think you can't just necessarily look at something like that as your only way to quantify one of these players. And then another part of it, I think that you have to think about is, I don't think you and I have really spoken about this. When we brought in Fantasia, for example, on this, on a 2-year deal, if that had been a 1-year deal, I feel like it would be a lot more likely that things might be different in this situation. So I feel like you have to look more holistically at the fact that Owies, and I've heard other people say this, potentially just came out of contract at the worst time.
Nah, I mean, I agree with that. If Fantasia signs a 1-year or doesn't arrive at the club at all, I'd say Matty Owies is still on the list. So to a degree, you can say it's a poor list management move. I'm hoping that the Fantasia inclusion is a lot about this leadership and teaching the other smalls. We might not have seen it a lot last year because of a lot of injuries to our other small forwards. But I mean, Matty Owies is 28 years old, you know, going into next season, but he hasn't been there and done it. Like Fantasia can at least claim a little bit more because he's played more football and been a better player at a higher standard. So are we getting the leadership that we truly require from an Owies if you're looking at that attribute? Probably not. And at the end of the day, this is really harsh to say towards Matty Owies, and I've probably always been somewhat of a detractor to him. But if he was such a loss to us, that all these media, you know, all these journos are jumping on saying, why would you get rid of a guy that's kicked all your goals when none of the other small forwards are doing it? If he was such a big loss to us and such an easy get, considering, you know, we'd tanked his value and you could basically get him for free. He was always going to be a delisted free agent. Why did no club go for him? Why was the only club that ended up interested in him and got him at the end of the day one of the worst teams in the competition, West Coast, that are desperate for anyone to kind of play for them right now? I don't think he's a big loss because of that. Now, we spoke about this a little bit about Jack Martin the last time we spoke. Now, if Brisbane were interested, if Geelong were interested, you start to go, oh, are we missing out here? Because a team that can compete at the pointy end are saying he's worth a spot on our list, and Carlton are saying he's not. Are we miscalculating things here? But if it's only West Coast, I don't think I'm that fussed in moving him on. Again, I like this idea of the no safety net. Make a guy like Motlop, make a guy like Durden have to perform. And if not, so many players are out of contract next season. It's almost a make or break year for everyone. If you don't perform, you're gone. And Nick Austin's been strong on talking about those pathways into the team, in saying that, look, if Matt Owies may not be in our, say, best 22, but if there's an injury to Zach Williams, he comes straight in. Whereas if Matt Owies isn't there, all of a sudden, Moya maybe gets a game now. Maybe Durden gets a bit more exposure. Maybe Motlop gets that first choice instead. I've said it so many times, I like that high ceiling. I want to give that opportunity for those players.
Yes.
Holding on to Matt Kennedy, holding on to Owies might prevent us from, you know, letting go of the reins to someone else and saying, here you go. Here's your opportunity to shine and prove that you can go at this elite level. If moving Matt Owies means that Ashton Moya gets, 10, 15 games next season, I'll take that any day of the week.
Yeah, I fully agree with all that. And something that I was thinking about this yesterday, which is beginning to honestly frustrate me as the life of this podcast goes on, and we try and be objective about player value. There were all these reports that came out about the money that he wanted, right? And the manager said it was fake. We don't know. We don't know actually what these players are on. There's speculation from random sources. It's very different to other leagues where you can be very objective about what a contract is, how much they're making, what triggers, what clauses there are. it's so hard to be objective about something like this where, and we'll talk about Houston later, if you're talking about, well, we can't bring in Houston because it's too much money, but then pay Owies whatever he wants because he kicked 30 goals. Like that, you have to put all this on the same line, right?
I'm glad you brought this up because I don't agree that the figure thrown out would have been that. And it's so interesting with where stories come from. The leaking of Owies is asking for a lot clearly would come from Carlton. That is the only person that wins out in that is us saying we're getting rid of him because he's asking for too much money. Obviously, Owies and his management need to come out and say, no, he's not asking for that because it suits them better. Where the truth lies, who knows? But when you are looking at where the salary cap is and who gets what, Owies obviously would want a decent-ish wage. Nothing crazy, but he'd be wanting more than the bargain basement, which is probably what you're paying a guy like Motlop, Durden, and Moya at the moment. Now, if you sign Owies for 2 years and he's on that coin, but you're basically expecting those three to take the step up and be above him, then why are you paying Matty Owies more money? So I agree with you on that point. I think that's an important discussion to have, that while he probably isn't on a ridiculous amount of money, why pay for a position that you see others going past him over his contract? It doesn't make sense to me. And you can go on and talk about, is always the right player because he's more of a marking forward than a crummer. And maybe that doesn't work with our forward line if Kemp is going forward, Silvani's going in there, Moya's going in there. What's the balance like? But again, for me, it all comes down to Zach Williams is now in that forward line. So that takes a spot away from someone else. And no one else really wanted Matt Owies, so I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over it. I loved him when he was with us. Always that guy that, plays for the jumper, had that little bit of, dickhead in him that no one else had in our team that wanted to rile up the opposition. So I'm going to miss those elements, but it kind of goes on to what I'm going to talk about with Kennedy as well. And again, without trying to be disrespectful to these guys, and I want to know how everyone else sees this, but Lockie, are we improving next year by keeping Kennedy and Owies? Yes or no?
No.
Now, losing them means you can get worse, clearly, but you're not going to get better with these guys. So every single time when I'm looking at these moves, I would rather be on the side of trying to improve us than staying the same. So looking at Matt Kennedy going to the Dogs for pick 38, what did you think of the deal? Is this good value? Did you want Kennedy to stay? Are you worried about the midfield depth? How did you see this trade play out?
I mean, I mentioned this about Owies, and it's hard to value these. And so I looked at some of the other trades during this period. So Neil Bullen was pick 28. I think he's a better player than Kennedy, personally. Like he was third in the Demons BNF this year. People are talking about Kennedy being in our top 10. And then Jack Graham was 42. And I would think that Kennedy's better than Graham. So based on that, to me, the value, I guess, feels about right, being kind of in the middle of those guys. And then, the depth issue is another thing. Like how much better is Kennedy than Lord, for example?
Yeah.
Some people might not even argue that he is better.
Yeah. The value is interesting. At this stage, it looks like the pick 38, hopefully, will be a selection. It won't be a matched bid for Ben Camporelli. There will be a player that we select with that pick, fingers crossed. But, I mean, he's an inside midfielder. There's just no value for that. And he wasn't in our best. We've said that multiple times. They've shown that. Voss has said this how many times. Yeah, he might have played every single game this year, but he was sub. He wasn't that first choice midfielder when everyone else was fit. We showed the value that we saw in him by saying he wasn't necessarily required by shopping him around. So that tells me that it's hard to get value for him. The fact that we got pick 38, I think he's good. I'll take it. It's another shot at a draft pick that should be a couple of key position players, some key backs in that range I think we could take. And then as far as the depth, the question is probably durability of the others. And can we rely on that?
Yeah.
Can we rely on Walsh and Chera staying fit? And What do you make of the other players that could be in that position? Because I look back to the depth chart that we sort of made throughout the year, and, you know, Cripps, Walsh, Hewitt, Chera, and then it was Kennedy, then it was Lord. There's now no Kennedy, it's Lord, and really no one else. Now, it'll eventually be pick 3. It will be Ben Camperelli, although I don't think he's ready to play football at the moment. Is that enough? How are you seeing it? Are you seeing other players taking over the midfield? Do you think we've cut too thin in this position?
Do I think we've cut too thin? I really don't. I really don't. Obviously, pick 3 is going to come into this position. The guys that you named, Elijah Hollands is someone that I want to see playing more midfield next year. To your kind of point before around improving as well, like if Cripps and Walsh are out and it's like, great, Kennedy's there to come in, we're just like, are we going to win the flag then? Probably not. Like, if you lose your absolute top guys, that it doesn't matter what the depth is there to me. Like, the difference in quality of those depth guys compared to the top of the top is just so minimal. So, yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. I'd say we've cut slightly too thin. However, we can still add players. So maybe at the end of this, when we analyze it, we'll be absolutely fine. But there are still players that can go through there. Obviously, we've got Lord, pick 3, Camperelli, but then you got Doherty can play that role. Does this mean Elijah Hollands is starting to play a lot more midfield time over half forward? We know Fogarty can run through there. There was talks when we drafted him. I, again, don't think we'll see it next year, but Billy Wilson could eventually be that midfielder. So that's that Nick Austin talking about these pathways and opportunities. The ceiling on a Cooper Lord is higher than Kennedy. Kennedy's not going to get any better as a footballer. What he is really solid, great, you know, clubman of the year, all of that kind of thing. He's a lovely player to have on your list as depth, but it doesn't improve us next year. So I'm fine for us to take the stab at it and hope that moving Kennedy means pick 3 gets an easier pathway. Lord gets more games of football. We can try more things in that midfield over keeping a guy like Kennedy and then being forced to play him. And I go back to what you said, I think is the perfect summation of this. Depth is, you need depth to a point, but you can't, I don't think you win premierships with depth. You win premierships by staying healthy. And so, like you're saying, if we lose Walsh, if we lose Chera, then we're probably not winning the flag anyway. So you've got to find a way to stay healthy. And I don't know, is that the right perspective to have, that you just got to go all in with your best squad? And if you get injuries, you say, oh, well, it's a tough balancing act.
And then another side of it is I'm thinking about this from a real people sense, and think of how this has played out for him. How many years have we been telling him every year, you're not in our best midfield?
Yeah.
That's not where we see you. Yeah, you'll play there if there's injuries. Like, how many more years can that happen? Because it seemingly in the exit interview, they said the same thing. Hey, it's the same situation for next year. We understand if you don't want to be in that scenario.
Which is funny because I think he's in the same position at the Dogs as well. There's so many players I'd have before him.
Exactly, I said that in the
anyway,
last
but at least he gets an opportunity at it. Last thing on Kennedy, what do you make of us maybe not treating him well? That probably is something that has been said in the negative in moving a guy like Kennedy, who wins, you know, best clubman. He plays everywhere you ask him to play, goes above and beyond for that, well respected. And the issue of, if you move on a guy like him and Owies, does that send a bad message to the players? Is there locker room issues where the squad go, hey, why are we moving on a guy that does everything for this football club? Do you have any opinions on that perspective? And again, going back to what happened in the final of, you know, he stays in Melbourne for his wife to give birth, flies up, then gets subbed out and not being maybe treated the best that way. Do you have any thoughts on that scenario?
It feels like a lifetime ago that this happened. Isn't part of that story as well that he was unwell in the week leading up or something, that he wasn't 100% fit? Do you recall this? Or I
don't remember that. I think it was more that just his wife was about to give birth, so he was staying back. I don't think there was anything else to it that I've heard personally, but I'm happy to be
might have to go back to the archives. To me, like I'm definitely of the opinion that players need to be treated well. And if players aren't treated well,
Mm.
then that can affect culture. Do I think that either of these players have actually not been treated well?
Mm.
Based on the information I have, I would say no.
No, I mean, I agree. When I've looked at this whole scenario, I feel like we've been very open and transparent. It's, look, you're not getting in this midfield. We've said that for a few years. We're almost blunt about it this year, saying we don't see you as a midfielder anymore. You're, to be disrespectful to him, a bit part player. If there's injuries, you come in. We see you as that forward kind of hybrid. We'll plug and play if there's an injury like we did this season.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fair enough. We're mature. He's an adult. He's a father now. He's fine with that, and he's moved on. As far as we treated him poorly by subbing him because he, flew up on the day so he could be there for the birth of his kid. Like, I don't think just because you had a child means that you can't get subbed out of a game of footy. And I'd be worried if Vossi and co were making those decisions for the sentimental reasons. Like, to be really harsh on Kennedy, and I feel like I'm always harsh on this guy, so maybe I'm not the person to have this conversation, but firstly, maybe be smarter and don't conceive a child 9 months before the only important month of your footballing career. Seriously, like, I feel like I'm Kane Corns at the moment, but you should be really thinking about that, about when you do have a kid, that it's not going to be born in September. It's the only time you need to be fit and available. But then on this, like, your job is to play football, and obviously be there at the birth of your first child. Clearly, that's a big moment. Means more than football, but your job's to play. You said, I'm good to play. I don't want the sentimentality of, I'm not going to sub you out of the game if I think it's the right call, which, look, I don't agree with Voss. I don't think that was the right call, but he does. I'm glad he stuck with that and didn't go, but he flew up today. He's just had a son or daughter. I can't sub him out. So I don't think that's, like, we want to be a brutal club. I don't even think that's a brutal call.
Yeah. I don't quite get the connection that others have made in that sense. That what should we have played him? I don't know. Like, should he have had the most time on ground, and should he been having the lead midfielder that day because of this? Like, where do you draw the line on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. But the real juicy part of this episode is, of course, somewhat discussing the one that didn't happen. Dan Houston, probably the biggest player to move in the trade period, widely reported before, during, and after that we were his first choice. He really wanted to come to the club because of his connection with Michael Voss and a few of the players, and probably just because we're Carlton, and why would you not want to join us? Ultimately, we refused to pay the asking price. Do you think it was a mistake not bringing in Dan Houston?
This is the one part of your beautiful run sheet that I did not add any notes to prior, because it's really hard for me to wrap my head around. And as I kind of touched on to you before we started, I think that I'm more bullish than most about how we can be next year.
Yeah.
Therefore, in my mind, it would make sense that I would be more bullish than most on bringing in the players that will help us be better next year, and care less about the future, which makes me feel hypocritical to say that I don't think it was a mistake. Because while I think that Houston would make us better next year, and with what Collingwood paid for him, feels pretty reasonable if we did that same deal, I like the fact that it's going to be pick 3, hopefully a player for the next 10 years, can contribute next year, and we can still go all the way without Houston.
Yeah. No, it's something that I've been strong on with Dan Houston in, look, he's clearly an amazing player. Was he the right player to bring in? Maybe. At that price? No, not for me. When you see what else we're able to do out of it, getting pick 3 rather than pick 14 and 12, and would either pick 14 or 12 even got the job done. So if you end up with Houston and pick 12 rather than pick 3, is that better? I don't even know if it'd get to that because then we didn't have a future second to offer. Obviously, Collingwood were dealing with Port for, a few players that they were moving on. So I don't know if that'd even get the deal done. And maybe pick 12 or pick 14 and Houston is better than pick 3 when you're talking about that wage, what you're giving up, the type of player Houston is. I'm just not sure it was right at the end of the day. And would you have rathered a top 20 pick and Houston or pick 3? What are your feelings around it?
I know. That's what I feel like I have a different feeling every day on the matter. I guess I'll skirt the question by saying I think there genuinely could have been tough discussions internally about this in terms of some people, maybe guys like with a bit of a shorter term incentive pushing for Houston, whereas guys that are trying to be a bit more longer term, going for a bit more of that future route, which you would think would be Austin, and that's kind of where things went.
And obviously, it's difficult because we're talking about a potential player, and this is where everyone that was in the Houston camp will offer this argument of, we don't know what pick 3 could be. They are unknown quantity. We know what Dan Houston is, so you should bring in the known. But bring in a guy, 28, can't necessarily get any better. He's still really good at going to be a good player at Collingwood, and he could have been that at us. But is that the final missing piece? And I feel like when you're giving up a first-round pick for a 28-year-old, a decent salary, when you're looking at who we still have to pay, De Koning, we've just paid Wiedering. Our squad can't allow too much more players on the wage of a Dan Houston. Feel like there's other issues. And so is it Houston or the potential of that point of difference midfielder? I'm taking the point of difference midfielder over a halfback any day of the week. I don't think you pay up big for halfbacks. We've done it. It hasn't necessarily paid off. No other club in the history of the league has really paid up for halfbacks and it been the decider for them. So I'm pretty happy with, I think, what we've done. We've kind of skirted around this a little bit, but I'll ask it one more time because I want everyone's thoughts and opinions on this. We're in that win now mentality, Lockie. This demographic and age says that. We've gone hard on the draft over established talent. Overall, is that the right move, or should we have gone all in, whether that's Houston or another player that I know no one else went in that trade period, but if you have those conversations early enough, you go hard enough, you can ruffle some feathers and get someone to request a trade. Do you think we should have gone heavier at ready-made talent, or are you happy that we've kind of, I guess, gone both ways for it and allowed that safety net of, well, we've still got some talent coming through over the next 10 years?
I think we've done the right thing. And if there's specific guys that you think that we could have gone harder at, then that's a discussion. But for me, when I think about this, the club holistically and this midfield, the most important position on the ground, and we have arguably the best midfielder kind of in his prime. We have a guy who we think can be one of the best midfielders entering his prime. And then now we're going to be able to bring in a proper young gun who we hope could be one of the best players in the league in 5 years. That's a really healthy spot for us to be in.
Yeah. I think it's been a bit of a worry over the last few years, the lack of youth coming through. Like, you look at that depth chart and like Brody Kemp's really like the youngest key back, if you can call him a key back. In the back line, at least, you got Cowan, Wilson, you could say that. Midfield, okay, there's Cooper Lord, Ollie Hollins, Elijah Hollins, Motlop, Moya. Like, there's not a lot of youth coming through, and most of it is in that mid-20s, later 20s, and Collingwood have gone all in. They kind of can't do anything else at this stage. We were probably a year or so off having to make those moves and say we're either, starting a bit of that rebuild again, reshift, or banking again and trading all our picks for established talent. I think this is probably that last year that you can go a bit heavier again at the draft. So I'm kind of happy we've hedged our bets with it. And by hedging our bets, we're getting a top 3, top 4 best player in the draft. That is the best hedging of bets possible rather than pick 14 or pick 12 in the draft. I think we've massively won there at the potential that you can bring in. Last player to talk about, someone that didn't end up moving, was Brody Kemp. It was a late move if it was going to eventuate. What did you make of this? And would you have been okay with Brody Kemp moving on?
Yeah, you and I texted about this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll just say my thoughts. I definitely wasn't happy at the thought of him leaving. When you look at the depth chart, it just would have left us so thin. Whether you see him as a backman or someone that could be a forward, I'm still at this stage seeing him as a backman, and someone that can still continue to improve at his age. So I would have been pretty worried if we were without him now. And then I guess just the value conversation, because there is a pick where you don't say no, but we never would have got to that pick for me.
Yeah, we probably disagree, but also agree at the end of it, where I was in my head probably more open to, okay, what is Brody Kemp right now? He's probably not a key defender. He's probably a third tall back, if that's his position. Well, McGovern and Haynes are also that. So where is he in the depth chart? As a forward, is he a forward? Has he proven it enough? No. Unknown commodity kind of everywhere at the moment. So I was open to moving him in that sense of, you can kind of do without that player because he's not necessarily nailed on best 22 discussion right now. However, going back to your point, well, what are you bringing in replacing? Because we don't have a lot of key backs if he is that. So now we're cutting ourselves really thin. And that's probably where it ended up for me, which is where we kind of align in, well, they offered a future second.
Yeah.
That's not enough. If we're losing Brody Kemp, it needs to be something we can add right now that improves us next year. Losing Brody Kemp and not bringing anything in doesn't improve us for next year. So what would be the point? Now, if we were getting, and I'm going to be ridiculous here with it, but if there was some way that we could have moved a bunch of picks with Brody Kemp and gotten one of those 7 or 8 somehow, because I think their next best pick was like pick 30 something, then maybe, that would be the perfect deal. We could bring in a key defender that could be the next Brody Kemp or better, find a couple of depth plays for the short term, and then it works out. But if you're getting pick 38, like what's the point? It just didn't seem worth it in the end. And it's going to be interesting next year with him out of contract. The value might be even less, but it just all happened way too late. And if he gets out of that back line or forward line, good Lord, we're already thin. I'm not sure who we would have brought in that would have covered it. So I think we are aligned at the end of that. So where does that leave us, Lockie? Now that the trade period is over, what are the holes that you still see? What are the issues that maybe haven't been addressed in the trade period that we can look to address delisted free agents in the draft before we finalize the list for 2025?
Yeah, it depends how you define holes. I think the key defense is obviously something that we circled.
Yeah.
And it's something that if you look at our team now, guys like McGovern and Haynes, and this kind of goes to that Kemp discussion as well. Like I think I said to you, would you be shocked if in a year McGovern has, maybe not had the best injury luck, and Haynes is also at the end, and then suddenly it's like, oh my God, now there's no one there, even thinner. So that's probably the one that I point at the most.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously that midfield point of difference we talked about. Key defense, I think we still need something. Then apart from that, it's just maybe still a little bit of midfield depth, or looking at the available talent. Small forward is still a hole, but you're either bringing in another youngster, which is Motlop and Durden and Moya. So what's necessarily the point of bringing in another?
Agreed.
You're not going to bring in anyone else of quality. Is it key defensive depth? Sorry, key forward depth as well? Maybe, but I don't think we've got a lot of list holes at the moment if we stay healthy. The list is looking pretty strong. If you're looking at that sort of top 23 to 30, it's just about those little pieces. So I don't think that there's a lot, which is the exciting thing. And there has been, I guess, a few more moves since the last time we spoke. We've delisted 3 players: Jack Carroll, Sam Durden, and Matt Carroll. Now, the latter 2 in Durden and Matt Carroll and Sam Durden have been offered train-on spots. It makes it confusing when they're the only people that also share the same last name, really. We've offered Matt and Sam train-on spots. So that means if there are still list spots open after the draft, they can train with the team over preseason, and in the SSP period, we can offer them a position. I guess, what are your thoughts on those delistings and whether we should potentially bring any of those back next year?
Yeah, it'll depend on any of the other delisted players, I think, around the league, and whether we can look at bringing them in, because we talk about the key position depth. Yep, Sam is that, as long as he's healthy. So I wouldn't be upset if we weren't able to get anything else done and he is still there as our depth. And then Matt Carroll, I mean, I know so little about him, but he's so freaking young. Like, he's not someone that's going to be playing a role next year. So do we, we want guys that are, I don't even think he's 19. So,
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, Sam Durden, if we can get someone better, awesome. If he trains with us and we give him a spot, that's fine. If he's the last guy that gets a list spot, you'll cop it. Same probably for Matt Carroll. I mean, he's a bit more of that. I think he's actually like 190 centimeters. He's a little bit taller, but he plays as more that small defender. He's probably a similar vein play style to like a Lockie Plowman, where he's a taller, small defender and more defensive than attacking. At least that's what he was like in his sort of underage football. Injured all this year, so we saw not much of him. Again, if there's one list spot, he'd be that Cat A rookie. So again, it's not much that you're giving up for him as a chance. You'd be okay with it. Jack Carroll's, I guess, not super surprising, but maybe surprising with the lack of midfield spots we currently have on this team. At the end of the day, does he take us forward next year? If there's an injury, do you trust him being the guy that steps up? No. Is he truly a midfielder? I'm not convinced. It's harsh to a degree, and maybe it leaves us slightly thin of a guy that is somewhat ready to go, but I still don't know if he is. And that's probably where I sit with a Jack Carroll. I think I'm fine with letting him go. I like the idea of bringing in someone that can be better, because at the end of the day, what is he? I still don't know. Is he a half forward? Is he a wing? Is he a midfielder? What's he truly good at? What is his point of difference? Handful of good games probably just isn't enough, and I'm happy to go with the unknown.
Complete agreement. I feel like before this season, in his first 3, there wasn't really much that you or I were that excited about, and then showed some flashes this year. Yeah, I feel like seeing the commentary after he's delisted, I feel like I'm lower on him than a lot of people.
I agree.
But yeah,
it all goes back to that. If we get injuries, would I rather him or throw in a random name? And again, I think it would be flipping a coin. I just probably don't rate him that highly. Now, how many list spots do we have left, and what can we play around, and what can we do with them, Lockie? So taking away all the delisted players, everyone that's been traded away, we add in Nick Haynes. Let's preemptively add in the camper rallies, as they've said they want to come to the club. We're definitely going to be picking them up as father sons. Let's add in a pick 3, a pick 38, and we've committed to the Irish recruit of Matt Duffy after his ACL last season. That would mean the current list stands at 35 on the senior list, 4 Cat A's, 2 Cat B's. That's 41 in total, meaning we have 2 spare spots on the senior list and 1 spare spot on the rookie list. Now, that could be Sam Durden. It could be Matt Carroll as a potential. But what would you like to do with it? Are there any players that maybe are less in the draft sense? Let's take a look at maybe some of the delisted players that you'd maybe give a lifeline to, or are you just simply staying with a Sam Durden and Matt Carroll? Where would you like to take it? Are there any delisted players that have maybe you've got your eye on?
Yeah. I mean, it's never the sexiest crop, is it? But of these guys that you've kind of chuck there. It's probably the Hawthorn guys to me. And I know that I feel like there's been a little bit of linkage potentially with old Denver. I don't know heaps about both him and Ethan Phillips, but as guys in a team where obviously they've just brought in Battle and Barris, already got Sicily there, like they've got a big kind of squeeze on key position guys. Pretty young, kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's probably my number one. Would be, look, Denver Granger Barras was a high-ish draft pick. Sometimes key position players take a little bit of time to develop. Clearly, at the moment, he's not amazing. We're not going to be bringing in someone that's going to set the world on fire, but as a shrewd move for at least one season as some depth, someone that has an AFL-ready body. He's only 22, I believe, so he still has some potential to still play some really good football. 194 centimeters, so he's still kind of that mid-size. He's not necessarily that big lockdown key defender, but that's probably where I would look at it rather than look at Ethan Phillips. I still like 25, came in as a mature recruit. I believe he was drafted. He might have been a mid-season recruit, but 197, so a little bit taller. He's someone that's maybe a little bit more ready to go, but again, there's more potential on Granger Barras, so I'll take the high ceiling. If you're looking for a list spot, I'd take both of those guys. I'd take Tomlinson or Cleary over Sam Durden, if I'm being well and truly honest, as far as output. Take any of those guys for one of those spots, and I think we need to take one of them. Whoever it is, honestly, I'm not that fussed, but I think we do need one key defender. Another one, I mean, who do you look at if you're desperate for midfield depth? Parfitt's not the worst thing. It's basically Matt Kennedy, but cheap. Because you could maybe put him on the rookie list. You could pay him absolute peanuts. And output-wise, you're getting kind of similar to Matt Kennedy. And he's 26, so it's not like he's a ridiculously old player. But again, is that blocking your pathways? Is that the move you want to do? Do you take a punt on a guy like Jai Cully instead, who gets delisted from West Coast? He's 194 centimeters at 21 years of age. He's kind of that mid forward that we don't have. But does that take away from an Ashton Moyer that maybe plays a bit more of a marking forward? Or is it worth taking a punt on a guy that, when he did play before his ACL, looked really good, struggled last year? I guess the caveat on that is West Coast aren't good, so why are they getting rid of him? Is there something that we're missing? What are your thoughts on a guy like him that maybe has some ceiling rather than a Gary Rowan or Curtis Taylor that's been delisted that you're kind of not going to get much more out of them?
Yeah, it definitely showed some promise in bits of what I've seen of him. So, I mean, as you talk about all those guys, there's definitely something there. How you rank like Cleary and Tomlinson against Durden, I think it's very, oh God, that's not an exciting debate to have. They're all kind of one and the same to me, but I agree with you that I probably would have a crack at one of them for something different. I'm glad we're aligned. It really is one of those Hawthorn guys, and I think I'd be pretty pleased because, like you said, it could just be for a year, but you also probably wouldn't be surprised if it turned out better than, say, like Lewis Young did.
Yeah. No, 100%. And your last list spots, you can take the punts on players. So why not do something a little bit different? Like Liam McMahon's another one that's been thrown out there. Obviously part of our VFL team.
Yeah.
At the moment, he's better than, Harry Lemmy in that forward line, 22 years of age. Believe I read somewhere he's 198 centimeters. So he's a tall boy. Obviously a bit more of that ready-made AFL player. Yeah. If there is an injury to Harry or Charlie, which I like, I'd say that's more of a need than taking a punt on another midfielder or a Jai Cully type. If I was to pick two guys, I'd say give me Barras, so Granger Barras and McMahon as just some more key position depth, and that last spot, do whatever. If it's Matt Carroll, go for it. But that would be my priority for those two. And then one that I'll throw out there, I probably should have done some more research. I don't even know his first name, but they spoke about him on the Tradies podcast, Sam McClure and Mitch Cleary mid-year. There's another McCartan brother, and I believe he's the middle McCartan brother, who they were saying a few AFL clubs are keeping tabs on because he's come back to footy and he's playing in some bush league somewhere that Ed Curnow is the coach of. And apparently he was playing good footy, even though it was at a lower country league level, to the point where a few clubs were saying, hey, we might give this guy the last list spot as a, mid-size kind of key defender. So I'll just throw that one out there now as a potential name come national draft or rookie draft. But it would not surprise me, knowing Nick Austin, that one of the players that we pick up as a delisted free agent or whatever is just going to be someone we've never heard of. And they could get a decent output like we've seen, a Jordan Boyd or Cooper Lord so far, that, okay, there's something here.
Charlie McCartan. Is there room for two Charlies?
There we go.
In this forward line?
Oh, why not? Get some more Charlies in the team. But let us know what you thought on everything that we covered throughout this episode. What did you make of our trade period? Were you happy with the ins? Were you happy with the outs? Anyone else you thought we should have gone after? Did we need to go Dan Houston? Very keen. Drop all your thoughts in the chat. Who should we pick up with pick 3? Because that's where the attention goes to from here. We'll be doing a draft preview. We'll be recapping it when that all goes down and the list is finalized. We can go back to the depth chart and see if we've done enough to improve headed in to 2025. Lockie, the last thing I will ask you, I want a school-style report grade on our trade period. What are you giving Carlton and Nick Austin's business?
Wow. A question without warning. You know what? I'm going to give it, I'm just going to go with my heart, B+.
Ooh, very similar. Yeah, I'm going to B. I think has the potential to be an A+ with the pick 3, but it was solid. Now, I think I can't say it's more due to the amount of unknowns, which is probably what excites me. It's what maybe a lot of pessimistic about we didn't bring in, Tom Papley. We didn't bring in Bailey Smith, and all of a sudden you go, Carlton are going to win the flag next year. Look at all these additions. It's the shrewd thing of, okay, well, there's a spot now for Motlop and Moyer to come into this team. What is Silvani like? What's Doherty going to be like? Do both Hollands play in the midfield? What's Brody Kemp? Who's going to take the step up? Is Cooper Lord the player? Is pick 3? Like, everything is this complete unknown now.
That's exciting.
Heading into next year. That's where I get excited, but I know a lot are going to be pessimistic. But again, drop your thoughts in the comments here on YouTube. Let us know on the socials at Navy Blue Corner. We'll be back shortly with a draft preview. Very excited for the off season. Up the bloody baggers. See you guys next time.